All right. Well, there we are.
I love that intro.
I would be willing to bet that if there were a contest for the Bela Fleck butch lesbian banjo players, you would win.
I would win for sure. I'm probably the only one in the world.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
I have to make one clarification off the top, though. I no longer own a tractor.
No.
Oh, no.
What
happened?
No longer. What?
I'm living in the city now.
My entire image.
Okay, yeah. You got to
Yeah.
downsize.
I don't know. I thought I knew you, Aaron.
I'm sorry.
You got rid of your tractor. I was going to brag to Al that you have a tractor. He has a tractor. Why did you sell your tractor?
So I left the farm. So I went back to school, living in the city now.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that seems really interesting. I'd love to get into that. I know that we just got into the intro. My name's Morgan. I'm going to be co-hosting with Ellen. And she's got far more accolades and crowns of that she could wear that gives her the authority to speak on some of these issues. But I'm just a fan of Ellen and everything that she does. And, today we'll be interviewing Aaron, and I would like to kind of maybe extend the floor to you, Ellen, to start us off, and then we can open the floor to Aaron.
All righty. So here, this is a little bit about Aaron. He grew up in rural Western Canada, where homophobia was part of the culture. He was born with a disorder of sexual development, aka DSD, which means he was born female with some testicular tissue in one ovary, which caused a hormonal imbalance and gynecological problems. His DSD was undiagnosed until he was 19. Later, as an adult, he began medicalizing and transitioned with testosterone and a radical mastectomy. After 2 decades as a trans man, he realized the harms of denying the realities of sex, including harms to trans men themselves. He variously describes himself as a trans man, a lesbro, and a butch lesbian who has medicalized. A person of many talents, Aaron has degrees in fine arts, nursing. He practiced as a psychiatric nurse, is completing a master's degree in women's and gender studies, and is about to enter a PhD program in sociology. His area of interest and research is focused on violence against trans men, and he is developing a concept he calls epistemic substitution. In his spare time, he makes beautiful short videos and plays the banjo. Among the issues we plan to talk about are pronouns, high rates of prostitution and sexual assault among trans men, the problem of how trans men's complaints among trans men complainants are understood in court proceedings, how old-style feminism is vital to trans men, the disappearance of lesbian spaces, and an epistemology to address the unique needs of trans men. So, Aaron.
We've got a bit to cover.
Huh?
How much time do we have?
2 or 3 days. I don't know. I guess people
could talk an hour about each of those things.
As long as we can have you. Yeah.
Pronouns to me are not the most interesting of subjects, but they are the most contentious for some reason. So you have the floor. Tell us about, I have asked you what pronouns you prefer, and you skirted the issue.
I did skirt the issue. I've come to hate the question.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. No, it's.
Yeah. When I started my program
anywhere, but go ahead.
Yeah, when I started my program here at the university, I mean, every beginning of every class, when we're first meeting one another, we have the obligatory pronoun rituals, right? So we had to go around and announce our programs. So I'll tell you what I told them. This is my cohort of students. I knew that I'd be committed to working with them for the year. And so when it came around to my turn, I said, I am female. I look like a man. Use whatever pronouns you think are appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And people hated that answer.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't angry about it, but they were confused about it. And
Right.
so they pressed me, but no, I mean, which ones do you prefer? And I said, you know what? How often am I going to be in the room when you use a pronoun?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, pronouns are about utility. It's about, if we were all in a grocery store together and you didn't know me, but you needed to point me out to somebody that go there, you know, what pronoun would you use? Looking like I do, what if you needed to point me out to somebody in a public space, what pronoun would you use?
Right.
What, I mean, it's very contextual. And I think people should be free to use whichever pronoun makes sense to them. And considering that most of the time when pronouns are used, I'm not in the room anyway, so it makes no difference to me. So I don't know. I have no idea, you know, among my cohort of students and professors, I don't know what pronoun they use because I'm never in the room and I don't care. I mean, I have a really good, healthy working relationship with all of them. I enjoy all of them. We're focused on our work, right? We're not focused on pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it actually becomes important in a little while. We're going to talk about a trans man, Jacob Diamond, who was sexually assaulted by a trans woman. And of course, we're actually talking about a man sexually assaulting a woman. But if you go into a courtroom with that, it's just, but let's save that for now, I guess. Unless you want to jump into that now, we don't have to stick with it.
We could.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I would add that the pronoun element. Yeah, I think that's very refreshing to hear, Erin, your take on it, where it's not so. Sometimes you hear people, they like to police people in, you know, and if you say the wrong one or if you don't catch them accurately saying the one that you subscribed, and most of the time it's never ill-meaning. So I think it's very interesting that you said that, because a lot of people do take it that way, that you know, me growing up in North Carolina, it's not this whole issue is totally new, as opposed to like growing up in like a New York, somewhere that's far more progressive, is just how I feel. So it's always, when people say that they have a certain type of pronouns that you want to use, it's almost like I have a sense of pressure to make sure that I get it right. And because I don't want to embarrass somebody or make them feel like I'm being hateful, when it really comes from stemming from a place of ignorance. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be ignorance, it can be confusion. And I relate it to the question, why do you use the word illegal in immigration? And I'm like, I use the word illegal because the people I talk with in the fields and in the plants refer to themselves as illegals. Or in my video, there's a stretch in there where a man refers to himself, and he had been sprayed with pesticides and nearly died, as the other mojados, which mojado usually is translated as wetback and is a slur, but he didn't mean it that way. He was talking about, I think, you know, the sweaty people, the wet people from working in the fields. And I'm like, I'm not going to straighten them out. I'm not going to say, and I know people who do that. They will say, you're not illegal, you're undocumented. And it's so condescending and so cringe. But anyway, so that's
all these language words, right? And I mean, I didn't know what to expect going into a women's and gender studies program. I wasn't sure if I would have chairs thrown at me on the first day or what, but I mean,
oh goodness,
because I don't care, right? Like, I don't care what pronoun they use. I know who I am. I don't need validation from pronouns. I don't care. And I think because I don't care, it's not like I'm forcing those who are more queer theory leaning, I'm not forcing them to call me she, and those that aren't queer theory
Yeah.
leaning, I'm not forcing them to call me he. And because I don't care, I think that's why I have a good relationship with them, right? I mean, they can just
Right.
relax. They don't have to worry that if they say the wrong
Right.
thing, I'm going to slit their throats. Like,
Yeah.
it's our relationships are friendly, right? And they feel like they can ask me questions and we can talk about things, and I'm going to give them an honest answer. And there's no conflict. We have an amazing cohort of students, and my instructors have all been wonderful. So it's been nothing but a good experience.
And I'm glad. I think it sounds like you handled that so well. But this is really a problem in academia. I mean, there have been tenured professors, Jordan Peterson being famous, the guy a lot of people enjoy not liking, but he retired. He took early retirement rather than to be coerced. It's a free speech issue too, to coerce someone to use language that doesn't come naturally to them. And some people are changing their pronouns, everything, it's just, you can't keep up with it. And it's sapping energy from real problems like the high rates of prostitution and sexual assault among trans men. It really doesn't matter what pronouns you call people, as long as you put your energy into that and you ignore these other issues.
Yeah, I'm not here to study gender theory. I'm here. I'm on the ground, right? I'm looking at this from my own experiences, what I've seen with my peer groups, and my work as a psychiatric nurse, where I've heard a lot of stories. I've seen a lot of trauma, and the nature of nursing, whether in the community or in a hospital, it's one node in a network of institutions. And so I've seen young trans men coming in and out of foster care and homeless shelters, and some of them incarcerated. So I'm interested in what this looks like on the ground. What are trans men's actual lives? What are they experiencing, and so what it's turned into is a question of how do we interpret what they're experiencing?
Yeah.
And this is where I'm seeing a conflict between, gender identity is kind of a very high level, it came out of academia. It's been this framework has come down from the top upon us, and now settling into institutions. I'm at the level of the institution saying, how is this actually playing out in real lives? And that's where I'm seeing the problems, because I'm sorry, but you cannot scream at a rapist, I'm a man, to stop you being raped. Like when it settles onto the ground, when we have to actually make decisions about our own safety, or as a clinician, if I'm doing risk assessment and talking to people about institutional placement decisions, sex is a part of that picture. It has to be. And I don't think there are very many trans men who don't understand that. And that's, so when I started this program, what I'm interested in looking at, I started just doing a very broad survey of data. So I looked at data sets like from homeless shelters. So there was a study in Toronto where a large percentage of the trans men were avoiding the shelter system altogether and would prefer to sleep on the streets because they don't feel safe in men's prisons, but we're also disruptive at shelters, and we're also kind of disruptive and make women uncomfortable in women's shelters. And so this has created a problem. And then in incarceration data, Corrections Canada released a report on its gender diverse populations from our federal prison system. And I do know some incarcerated trans men who are put in solitary confinement as a solution to this, which is very inhumane. But in the Canadian federal prison system, there were 21 incarcerated trans men. All but one of them were in a women's prison with no request for transfer.
Mm-hmm.
So if there were no requests for transfer, they must understand they're safer in a women's prison. And that's a sex-based decision. I mean, if they're seen as, if gender identity was the only framework that we're allowed to consider, then these trans men would go into a men's prison to affirm their identities, and we know what's going to happen to them. They're going to be harmed. And that happened in the UK recently, where there's a court case, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, of a trans man that was put into an all-male psychiatric unit. And I think it was on day one that two of the men, 6-foot tall men, clocked him as female and sexually assaulted him twice. So this is what happens when gender identity settles onto the ground at an institutional level. It has real implications for policy decisions, institutional placement, data collection, and risk assessment.
Right. And at a more mundane level, by the way, I want to take a second and say hey to one of my all-time favorite podcasters, Warren Dearman, who has a show called Extra Bulla. And he says hey to Ellen and all, and hey back to you. It's so good to see you here, as it were. Down to the more mundane issue of bathrooms. It's just, what kind of person, and I'm so surprised at all these women, some of whom have kids, saying, well, don't look. Well, just don't worry about it. Just, are you out of your mind? Are you out of your mind?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
if
really
you've got
interesting.
a little girl, if you've got a little girl, and you want to send her into the bathroom alone because you're minding the baby or whatever, you want some reassurance. She's not going to be even taunted or anything like that. She's just going to go in, use the bathroom, wash her hands, come back out. But you got people like Lily Tino and all of these people that are all over the internet that are just revolting human beings. But anyway.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we can't make these decisions based on, are you a good person or are you a bad person, right? I mean, how are we to know that? We don't have a creep meter at the doorway of every.
A creep meter, yeah. I mean, you could have women creeps going to the women's restroom, but I mean, that's not where the power imbalance and all of those things is typically. There was a court case in, was it England or Ireland? And I've forgotten the name of the woman, but she had been sexually abused. She was a nurse. Do you know what I'm talking about, Aaron? And they had these changing rooms where men would come in, and she was in there one day by herself, and he comes in and he's taking his clothes off and he's saying things like, aren't you going to get undressed? Aren't you going to change your clothes? And following around and saying that over and over and over. Well, clearly he was threatening her. Clearly she wasn't safe. And I think there was a judgment. I think there was a judgment that the men could no longer go into the same changing rooms with the women nurses, but I think maybe it wasn't. I think there was no real penalty enforced. We'll come back to that in another show, but when I get my.
What do you think the solution is? I mean, because I don't know for certain. I think some third spaces make the most sense.
I think third spaces make the most sense if you can have third spaces, if you've got the room for it.
Yeah, it's not feasible
and
everywhere.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's, I don't know how feasible it is. I was just in Copenhagen last December, and we went into the big department store there. I forget the name of it, But they had, these huge restrooms, and they had women, men, women and men, and so depending on which line was the shorter, I don't know if I got on the women's line or the women and men's line, but of course they have these heavy doors and they lock real well, and it didn't seem to be an issue. So that was a third option.
Yeah, I know a lot of the trans guys I know, whenever there's a third option, like, I mean, a lot of places have like a disability washroom or a family washroom, like where people go and change their babies. So that's those spaces are usually just a single stall, private. You close the door behind you, and it's private, and
Right.
either men or women can use those spaces. So that's, most people I know, those are the spaces that they're using, because they're often there is like a bathroom like that. I have it easy here on campus just because there are so many just single stall.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say, I come from a family of small business owners, and infrastructure, sometimes infrastructure and financial,
Right.
you can't really, knock down a whole new place and create a third bathroom, or, so it comes to mind as, a lot of these things that we worry about, they're already things that are against the law, harassment, sexual harassment. So to tack on another one, I don't know if it seems like a bit excessive, and I'm cognizant of the fact that the scenario that you laid out, Ellen, where it's like, okay, you want to send your child to the bathroom and not worry that she's going to be interrupted by someone who is there for ill reasons.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of like the nature of the world that we live in. We are very cognizant. We go to parks, or we go to even theme parks. We know that that's playgrounds for predators, or this new realm where children are on social media and Roblox. We know that you got to have a heightened sense of vigilance when it comes to your child using that, because of the dangers, the people that seek those platforms out. And so I don't know if that maybe is kind of what we take from it, is that it's just this new world where we have to be extra vigilant, and understanding that maybe is a possibility if we take the precautions that way. But to add on new laws, I find that to be a bit excessive, given if these crimes do occur, they're already illegal. To tack on another law seems a bit excessive and restraining. So what are your thoughts on that?
You're asking Aaron.
I'm asking both of you guys.
Oh, okay.
I'll start off with maybe Aaron. I'll start off with our guests.
I've been really lucky, because I don't remember the last time I used like a big, one of those big communal bathrooms where all the men or all the women are in a bathroom together. I've been really, I don't know, I try to avoid those kinds of spaces and seek out where there's just a single stall bathroom.
That's interesting.
And there's tons of them all over the place. I mean, sometimes I'll pop into a gas station, or, I mean, like I said, campus is full of single stall bathrooms. My previous workplace, it was just a single stall bathroom for all staff, so it wasn't sex segregated. So I don't actually remember the last time I really had to feel conflicted about it and make a choice. I mean, it's
also an issue. I think you kind of touched on it. It's a top down issue where, I mean, these are legitimate cases that you do hear, but they are exaggerated for the sensationalism of media, to where, you have people in conservative areas that are, they're talking about this issue, and it seems like that they might rarely ever come in contact with that kind of, instance. So I think that also plays a part. I know a friend who worked at the ACLU, and he kind of spoke about how the board meetings, they take on brilliant cases all the time, but there was a very deliberate shift to take on trans cases. And he felt like it was very strange, and it was very political. And then, we have this progression of this very divisive portion in media, where that is kind of, you take a side, and either you're, right-leaning person or a left-leaning person or a progressive person and a bigot. That's kind of how it's portrayed in the media. So I think you really touched on something very special, is that it's a top-down situation, as opposed to, when, like you said, you have these discussions in school and it's like, that's all secondary. You guys are just there to learn.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like change rooms are an even bigger issue than, because people are actually undressing. I've never understood that. I've never understood why it is we have this one place in society where we're allowed to all strip naked in front of each other. I've always thought that was really bizarre. But
I'll tell you what. At the gym, I go into my own little separate stall. I guess maybe it's like a confidence issue, but I just don't like to get naked in front of people. So
why don't I think we can just do away with that whole thing altogether? But
yeah.
even as a little kid,
gyms, do away with gyms. That would fix it.
There's always a bathroom, and I was a member of a gym for a few years, and I just used the bathroom. Like it's.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a kid, that was always my preference. I mean, I didn't identify as trans as a kid, but I was a very gender nonconforming girl, and I felt really uncomfortable.
Sure.
Changing in front of the other girls. And I think in my sort of moral world, that was part of why I thought it was wrong for me to change in front of the girls. I thought, well, the reason that the boys, I mean, this is my child brain thinking, if the reason the boys and girls aren't supposed to change together is because the boys are attracted to the girls, well, I'm attracted to the girls, so it must not be okay for me to undress in front of them either. Like I always had a very overinflated sense of morality, so I just thought, well, I shouldn't be doing this either. And I always used a bathroom. And I wouldn't have felt comfortable changing in the boys' bathroom. Like, are you kidding? That would have been
right.
In the boys' changing room, and that's what they're doing now in schools, is having young, trans men who are female-bodied in boys' changing rooms. Like that's not safe for them.
No, yeah,
it's not safe for them, and the other way around is just isn't safe for girls. It just isn't. I mean, I have been my whole life the most hypervigilant person ever, and I'm, without any particular reason, no reason having to do with sex or gender, but because my family were outspoken civil rights activists in Albany, Georgia, which is the first place Martin Luther King was put in jail, and then later in Birmingham. And so my family received death threats against us, that kind of thing. But also as I got older, just looking in, listening for the footstep behind me, looking in the back seat before I get in the car. And that kind of thing has left me, but for a long time, it was I went into a hotel once, Alan and I went, in Mobile, Alabama, and we were up on a way high up on a room way high up, and there was a window, and I'm like, I really don't need to pull the curtains. There's nobody out there, but in my mind, I'm like, there could be some creep out there with a telescope.
Like I think well, when I was a kid, like if a teacher, I was changing the bathroom anyway, but I mean, if a teacher had said to me, my name was Kim at the time, so it said, like, Kim, why don't we just have you in this private bathroom? Like we've got a staff bathroom, or we've got this bathroom for you. Then you're comfortable, everyone's comfortable. I would have been happy with that. Like I don't understand why this has become such an issue. There's always another option. There's always some private room that they can change in, or use the staff bathroom to go to the bathroom. Like I don't understand why people need to be validated so much. I just need somewhere to pee or change. Like it's not. Yeah. And I want to do that safely, and everyone wants to feel safe around me. So I don't understand. Yeah. Like I just don't understand why.
Literally don't understand it.
Contentious issue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think having studied a good bit of theory and so forth and so on, there's a place for theory, but it is, as you say, it's so top down. It's the kind of thing you talk about in graduate school And then, but you don't need to take that and turn it into a manual for real life behavior, you know. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing. They're pulling out the manual that they came across online and are,
I know.
you
It's
know,
this
not
manufactured moral outrage.
exactly.
There's lots of reasons
So,
why people are separate, right? I mean, you know, we don't have to go on a tangent with sports, but I mean, there's lots of reasons for why women can't participate in women's sport, right? I mean, that's why we have
yeah,
things like the Paralympics, because there are lots of different women with lots of different bodies, and they can't all compete together. And I don't hear women in wheelchairs in a moral outrage that they can't compete in the Olympics against other athletes. Like there are reasons why we separate people into categories, and
yeah, like it or not, you know. I mean, you can sit around and think about all the problems with it, but in fact, if you're running the Olympics, you've got some decisions to make, and you really don't want to put a man pretending he's a woman getting into a boxing ring with an actual woman and pounding the shit out of her. And everybody's going, oh, well, he's actually a woman. He's just a stronger woman. No, he's not. You know, that happened at the Olympics.
Yeah. I think, it happened in another forum as well. And the other, the woman, her skull was cracked because of the impact. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very strange. I think it comes down to a sense of, you know, the media and I would say, you know, activists in the sense, you know, kind of profiting off of that. But this endless movement of goalpost of, you know, of trying to reach this new pinnacle of civil rights, where it's like, okay, we reached that. Well, what's the next goal we can have? And as opposed to kind of recognizing the somewhat of the progression of society and understanding that they're gay people, they're lesbians, they're, you know, there's different forms and cultures and realities of life. People accepted that, and then it's now, well, let's have trans people, you know, compete as a woman and you know, in sports. And it's just this endless goalpost where you have to have this divisive dialogue between, you know, what we perceive as the right versus left to kind of constantly keep them at each other's throats. Is how I view it.
I have a friend that I came across through a documentary filmmakers group. She had made a movie called Fight Like a Girl. She started her professional life as a stripper, and she moved into boxing or fighting, I guess boxing, fighting. And so the subject of women in sports and all that came up in a Facebook thread, and she was saying, it's already a dangerous sport. It's already dangerous. It's already, you can get permanent brain damage. What struck me was not that she had that point of view, which totally made sense, and she's now a coach. She doesn't compete anymore. But the people in the thread were just like putting her down, like she didn't know what she was talking about. And she did know what she was talking about, and it was time to listen, you know. Yeah. But anyway, I think we might want to move into Aaron's area of real interest, which is the high rates of prostitution and sexual assault among trans men. And again, it's confusing to say that because we're saying trans men, but it's actually women who are being sexually assaulted and funneled into prostitution for many of the same reasons women have always been funneled into prostitution, because they're impoverished, they have nowhere to live, they have kids to support, that kind of thing. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
And that was one of my initial curiosities. I mean, I came to this program determined to prove that feminism applies to trans men. I wasn't entirely sure exactly what I wanted to study. So I cast a very wide net originally, but my curiosity was, we've got this culture war now between gender identity and radical feminism. And aside from the fact that I am a trans man and have a personal, vested interest in this, I'm also just really curious. I think trans men are a very interesting analytical case of how is this playing out and who's right? Does sex matter? And so I started looking at data, because if the Judith Butlers of the world were right that we could just organize the world by gender and that it's gender identity that matters and should organize the world, not sex. I mean, we've been playing Judith Butler's game now for roughly 30 years, since the early 90s. And so my curiosity was, if she is right that we could do this and we can just organize the world by gender and that sex doesn't matter, then we should see, because I do think feminism is right, that women have historically been disadvantaged and are exposed to very specific harms. And that's been the case for a very long time. And I don't see how that's disputable. I mean, the vast majority of rape victims are female. The vast majority of perpetrators are male. Like, we have some very robust data about sex-based patterns of violence and victimization. So my curiosity was, when we look like men, we change our pronouns to men, and we ask to be regarded as men socially, what changes? And what I'm finding is nothing changes. In terms of those sex-based patterns of harm.
Right. And that's so important.
It is so important. And I care about trans men. I mean, I know a lot of people are upset with me about how I'm looking at this and what I'm doing, but I'm doing this for trans men. I'm not doing this against trans men. When our data is being printed on these glossy pamphlets and passed around in various lobby circles, that these high rates of sexual assault, these high rates of poverty, high rates of physical assault,
homelessness,
and nobody's doing anything about it. They seem to think that if they just hammer into everyone's head that the solution is gender identity. But like I said, that's coming from the top down. And I'm looking at this on the ground, where people actually live their lives, and gender identity isn't changing any of these patterns for us. I mean, at least 50%. So some of the large surveys that I looked at, it was a little bit higher, at 53% of trans men have been sexually assaulted. Those patterns have been documented for years. And I couldn't find a single study that actually asked trans men what happened. What was the context? Who were the perpetrators? Were you assaulted before or after you identified as trans? That's an important question.
It is, yeah.
Nobody has studied it. And I think that's because in order to study it, we have to be honest. I mean, how do we properly interpret and study the sexual assault of trans men without acknowledging sex? It's a sex-based form of violence. And so because of the hype, I decided to focus on sexual assault because the prevalence rates are so high, and that data is very clear across many large surveys and small studies, but also because sexual assault is so well theorized. We've got tons of studies. We've got lots of feminist theory about how sexual assault is structured and functions. We've got literature on male to male rape, how that functions and is structured. So that data is already available to me. I already have a framework. I've got really good, statistics, and I've got a really good framework to try to understand this form of violence. And so I started with a narrative inquiry, because the missing piece is asking trans men what the hell happened. Without that, we can't interpret any of this and fit it into any framework. So that's where I needed to start. It wasn't a large scale survey. It was it's called a narrative inquiry study. So it uses a small sample, but it does a very deep dive into narrative. And the fact that I saw clear patterns across, even though it was only 3 participants, I used a number of different coding systems to analyze their narratives. And I didn't know what they were going to tell me. I didn't know if they were going to just tell me about, a specific isolated event, but they all told me a life story, starting from early childhood all the way through to the present moment.
And was Jacob one of these people? One of these 3 men?
It was Jesse.
Jesse
Yeah.
Diamond, one of these 3 men? Or
Yes.
can you say? Yeah, okay.
And I can say that because Jesse has used Jacob, no. I know, sorry, I was confused. One of my participants' name is Jesse, but not the same Jesse.
Okay, sorry.
So
clarify, that's not the same person.
And I'm allowed to say that because...
Are you talking about Jesse Diamond or somebody else?
Somebody else. So there is a participant in my study that goes by
Okay, apologies. Let's just...
That's okay. little diversion. We fixed that. So I asked them what happened, and there were very clear patterns across them. So some of those patterns are just the life course correction, that the discipline always started in childhood. They were all gender nonconforming girls who had experienced some form of correction and discipline for being gender nonconforming. So Jessie, speaking of Jessie, for example, told me that, and now goes by she, when she was 11, was dragged into the bushes by schoolboys, and they ripped off her underwear to check if she was male or female and mocked her for being so masculine. So all of them had stories like that to tell, where it started in childhood. And as they got older, that escalated. I think, masculinity in girls, to that degree, I mean, it exceeded what most people saw as the cute tomboy. It wasn't just girls who like sports. It pushed the boundaries of what people could tolerate as masculinity in girls, and that was corrected. And they all grew up.
Corrected. You're meaning something forceful. Corrected.
In childhood, it started more subtle. I mean, it could be like teasing and bullying, and
gotcha.
I mean, Jesse's, I think, was the most traumatic case, because I mean that came very close to a sexual assault. So that was a very traumatic case. She pointed out that one of the things she's still really sore about, I mean, she's 70 years old now, but one of the things she's still quite sore about is that she arrived to class late that day with a muddy dress and, leaves and twigs in her hair, and told the teacher what had happened, and she was disciplined and sent to the principal's office and not the boys. Yeah. She mentioned that several times. That's still something that's really sore for her, that it seems to be culturally acceptable to treat girls this way.
Right. Okay. I know who you're talking about now, and I think Jessie is the person who's coming on next week.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that correction escalated as they got older. So when they became adolescents, now the boys are wanting to, they are looking at the girls romantically and sexually. And so when there are masculine girls that don't fit the mold, it escalates into a harsher form of correction, because now you're defying what they want sexually, not just aesthetically and behaviorally. So that's when the sexual assaults tend to start, and then certainly into adulthood, when that masculinity continues into young adults.
Aaron, we have a question for you.
Sure. Awesome.
From a friend of mine who's also a Canadian, and he asked, do you feel you are more heard, in quotation marks, now than when you were female? I know a trans man who told me that he felt almost ignored as female, but heard as a male.
Yeah, I've noticed differences like that. And that's what all of my participants said too, was that especially when you're a gender non-conforming girl and woman, when you fit outside of the expectations of what our society thinks that we should be, I mean, the extreme end of that is sexual violence, but the more subtle forms of that is just you're kind of dismissed and overlooked and seen as deviant in some way. And so all of my participants said that for them, they were all sexually assaulted prior to medicalizing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they all said that the motivation, at least in part, the motivation, it was a little more complicated. I guess it was a little more complicated in all cases, but the primary reason they all said they medicalized was for protection and safety. It just, if
Mhm.
I'm being, if the world hates me this much as a masculine woman, maybe if I pass as a man, people will leave me alone. Like one of my participants said, this is lovely because it's such a clear message of leave me the hell alone. Like, and so
Mhm.
he's happy with his decision, still identifies as a trans man, and he has not been sexually assaulted again. But the other two were sexually assaulted again after becoming men. And so I just want to tell you quickly some of the patterns. So I want to tell you about that life course because I think that's important, but just some of the patterns. They all grew up working class and they all
Mhm.
grew up within religious moral contexts,
Right, right.
which I think intensifies. It's like femininity is not just an aesthetic preference. It's also can get wrapped up into people's moral
Right.
frameworks.
And that was part of your experience too, right?
Yeah, I
You
grew up in a
grew up
very
in a,
religious community.
yeah,
So
rural. Yeah.
so that seems to be the perfect storm for this violence. I mean, it's only 3 participants. I have to be careful about not overgeneralizing that. I want to do a large-scale study for my PhD, but that was the pattern that I saw, was that perfect storm. All of them low income families, religious moral contexts that moralizes feminine virtue and expectations, and gender nonconformity. And those 3 factors seem to culminate into sexual violence. But because 2 of the participants were sexually assaulted again after becoming trans men, they realized this doesn't work. Like, if this isn't going to protect me, then they kind of rethought their choices. But
Well, I think it was you that directed me to the video with the other Jesse, Jacob Diamond, whose story you also looked at. And so maybe we can talk about that for a minute.
sure.
Both Jacob and Elijah reported in public on this YouTube video that, and you can see they present as very masculine, they're bodybuilders and all of that. And they had a relationship with Rose Montoya. And Rose Montoya, for people who may remember, and you may not, but when Biden was president, during Gay Pride Week or something like that, they invited various lesbian, gay, and transgender people to come to the White House for a get-together, and Rose Montoya was invited. Rose is a man who has transitioned and presents as a woman, and she's the one who bared her breasts on the White House lawn, which of course does nobody any good. And that's the woman who, I mean, to do something like that is a very aggressive, in your face kind of thing to do. And she's the woman who was in the relationship with Elijah and Jacob. And I've got a banner there, Morgan, with the YouTube link letters on it, if you can find it. It was on the Transparency podcast. You want to talk
it's a heartbreaking story.
Heartbreaking. How can people go through so much? And Aaron, you remember it better than I do. What was
I actually wrote a paper about that before I did my study. That was I was looking at publicly available narratives of these assaults. And one of the things that really stood out to me is you could just see them, grasping for words, like struggling to articulate what they experienced. And
Yeah.
some of that could be the trauma. I mean, that when talking about traumatic events, it can also be very fragmented like that. But I think it was also just hard. How do you articulate that? Like, how do you process that when it's such a sex-based, body-based experience, and they're obligated to think of themselves as men and the perpetrator as a woman? Like, and he even said at one point, well, this is the first time I just started dating women, and this is what happened, right? And you could just see that cognitive dissonance as they were telling the story. And this is a problem. Like, if we can't talk about sex-based reality,
Yeah.
I mean, reminding you that it's at least 50% of trans men are being sexually assaulted, and we have to be, in order to address that, we have to be able to see it clearly and have language to articulate it clearly. That has nothing to do with wanting to disrespect people. It's just, I don't know how else we solve this problem. And I think that's why nobody wants to study it, because no one has the guts to take that on and to break the cardinal rule of saying, well, they're being sexually assaulted because they're female.
So you have this really great line you wrote when you, under the heading of the problem of epistemic injustice, the problem is not disbelief. It is unintelligibility, by which you don't mean that they can't make themselves plain, really, but that we don't have language that takes into account Rose Montoya is actually a man, and Elijah and Jacob are actually women. But you go into, say, a courtroom situation, not that they did, but if you go in, there's no way to make it intelligible, which is what epistemology is about. It's about knowledge and how we come by knowledge and that kind of things. I think that's a wonderful contribution right there.
I've done this project in stages. So, I mean, the first paper I wrote was about Jacob Diamond and just that problem, just articulating that I didn't have kind of my contribution worked out yet, but it was just about that problem of how do we even speak about this to address this problem. And then from there, I did the narrative inquiry, where I saw clear patterns in what happened. And then my next step was to place that within existing theoretical frameworks. So it clearly fits within feminist frameworks of violence against women, just in terms of the patterns, the structure, the motive. Because for intellectual honesty, I did look at male to male rape as well. I was willing to place it into whatever framework made the most sense and fit. It doesn't fit male to male rape patterns. Male rape tends to happen in institutional settings like prisons, or among gay men, because of stereotypes that gay men are always sexually available anyway. So why ask for consent? So the patterns, in terms of this, being sexually assaulted by somebody they know, somebody that has intimate knowledge of their anatomy. So often men who knew them prior to them becoming trans men. So all of those patterns fit violence against women. Right. So then that's when the next phase of the problem is how do we interpret this? How do we address the problem of language? And so I looked at Miranda Fricker's work on epistemic injustice, because that's kind of all the rage now in gender studies, and it didn't quite fit, because while I was looking at that work in philosophy, I was also doing case analysis in legal cases with trans men as complainants, thinking, well, what happens when these cases do go to court? How is this problem of interpretation landing in the courtroom? And so I looked at 4 cases, and I didn't cherry pick them. There were only 4 I could find in a 15-year time period. These cases aren't being reported and adjudicated. But I found 4 cases, transman complainants, and the legal reasoning. We have a sex-neutral sexual assault law here in Canada. So, I mean, in theory, it shouldn't matter what the sex of the victim is. It's a sex-neutral law. So it doesn't change the elements of the offense and the ability for them to determine liability, but it does have an impact on how they interpret the mechanisms of the harm itself. So I looked at 4 cases. One was a case of a young girl that had been sexually abused by her stepfather and then later identified as a trans man. So in that case, the judge spelled it out. He said, I am going to refer to you as she, because at the time of the assault, you were she and you had a female body, and saw sex as very crucial to understanding the vulnerability in this case. Acknowledged that the complainant identified as a trans man, so didn't disregard that, but said from a legal reasoning, I need to understand this as a father that sexually abused their stepdaughter. In another case, a trans youth was sexually assaulted by an older man. The sex of that youth wasn't recorded at all. We have no idea if that was a trans woman or a trans man. So we can't trace sex-based vulnerability at all in that case. In another case, a post-operative trans man was sexually assaulted by a gay man. And the comments made by the gay man made it quite clear that it was a corrective rape. The complainant told the man, I am a man, was asserting that the trans man was a man, and the gay man said, well, I'll show you otherwise, right? And so it was very much a corrective pattern. But the judge reasoned, because they prioritized gender identity, the judge reasoned it as a male-to-male rape. So when you do that, I classify the mechanisms of what actually happened. And then the final case I looked at was an immigration case, a lesbian couple, one who identified as a trans man, had been threatened by a male relative, assaulted, and they were told that they would be murdered. Fled to Canada. The entire immigration case required that we understand them as a lesbian couple. If we saw the trans man as a man, now they're a heterosexual couple, and now their whole case doesn't make sense. Why would a heterosexual couple need to flee? So their whole case depended on them being understood as both being female, and that it was the nature of the fact that they were a lesbian couple, and one was gender nonconforming and identified as a trans man. That was the very basis. We needed to frame it that way in order to understand the nature of the harm that they were fleeing from. And initially in that case, the trans man was misclassified as a trans woman, and that became a big part of this legal document, was just sorting out, are you actually male or female? Are you a trans man or are you a trans woman? Like, that became the preoccupation of so much of that case.
Any chance, were they from Honduras?
No, they were from Mexico.
Oh, okay. This is one of the things I've talked about so much, having to do with the caravans coming out of Central America about 8 years ago. One of the things that happened was that Manuel Zelaya, who was the democratically elected president of Honduras, was illegally displaced, a coup d'etat that was very much supported by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who is always touted as this prominent feminist, women's rights, human rights, or once and for, in China. Some of the fallout from that coup d'etat was that it sent Honduras spiraling downward into extreme poverty, femicide, gay lesbian persecution, but also horrific persecution of trans women, including reports of them being murdered, their bodies chopped up into little pieces and thrown to the ditch. And so there were a number of trans women, men presenting as women, coming out of Honduras, 2 of whom died in Border Patrol custody. This was like a big thing, these trans women coming out of Honduras in particular. But it didn't get reported on. Not, these things never get reported on, really. I knew about it because I follow immigration news and knew about them, and then knew about, oh gosh, their names, Hernandez and, well, I know their names, but one was HIV positive and they wouldn't give her any medication in the lockup, and they're very sick, asking for help, and they both died. But this doesn't get the news, at all. Of course, Border Patrol has been terrible on sexual abuse and mental abuse of children that they've arrested coming out of Mexico and other places. And I've talked to some of them. But where was I going with that? I did want to come back to talking about what actually happened with Jacob Diamond. I mean, I don't know if he was undocumented, but he was from Mexico, I think. And yeah, he's black. He's black. And he had been homeless. He was poverty stricken when he met Rose Montoya, who, as he reported it, and it seemed to me very credible, that she just really pursued him and groomed him until he was living with her. And then he was transitioning, and he had just undergone surgery, phalloplasty, which has to do with, you can explain this better than I can, Aaron, but it has to do with surgery to remove the penis and then create a fake vagina. He was like 5 days out from the surgery.
No, that would be the opposite. So for him, it would have been creating a penis, creating a neopenis. So they usually take a chunk of your.
Right.
Yeah. So they usually take a most common method is they take a chunk out of your forearm to create it. So he was, but you're correct that he was recovering. So he must have kept his vagina. So he was immobilized, still bleeding from the surgery, had just gotten home from the surgery, was told that he could not have sex for several months. I think it was several months after the surgery. So I may have the time period wrong, but it's a long recovery time. It's a very complex surgery. But he was given a specific time frame. You cannot be sexually active for this period of time, which he told Montoya. And
she just insisted
and forced, and he said it felt like being chopped open by razor blades. It hurt so badly.
So I mean, that's one reason I really encourage people to watch this video, because it's just it's a life that I've never had any access to or understood at all. And so you can see when you go into a courtroom, that would be, as you say, the problem would not be the judge or the jury not believing it, but not being able to articulate it to themselves in any way that makes any sense.
Exactly. So that's why I've created this. I'm working up this concept, which I call epistemic substitution. So just to explain some of the theoretical framework that comes out of. So Fricker's work is about epistemic injustice, and she names 2 types. One is testimonial injustice, in which it's all about how we interpret things. So she said, with testimonial injustice, our interpretive frame can be too narrow, and you end up undermining a victim's credibility. So, for example, a prostitute might not be believed if she reports a sexual assault because our assumptions about victims can get in the way of belief. So she calls that testimonial injustice. The other type is hermeneutical injustice, in which we just don't have a framework to name something at all. And so the example she gave was sexual harassment, that before we had that term, those events occurred. But until you have a term to describe it, you can't really name it and you can't pick up patterns. But neither of those things is really what's happening here. I mean, we know what rape is. So
Right.
we understand that. It's not like we don't have a word for that. And in the court cases, the complainants were believed. So it wasn't a testimonial injustice where their credibility was undermined, but there's still a problem of interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
When we don't know, do I interpret this through your gender identity, or do I interpret this through your sex? And when patterns of violence themselves and risk, things like risk and harm assessments, we have to take it into account sex. And so what I explained from those 4 cases, I mean, the judge reasoned those cases very differently, sometimes foregrounding sex and sometimes foregrounding gender identity. So the inconsistency across these cases, that fragments across cases. If the sex isn't documented anywhere, then we can't track sex-based vulnerability at all across these cases. And case law works, but through precedent, right? I mean, that's how decisions are made, is you look to what precedent has been established. And so if cases fragment, you lose the ability to track. And so it is an epistemic problem. It's a problem of frameworks and how do we understand the nature of this violence. So I'm not arguing that trans people shouldn't have legal protections. I'm not saying we have to now, call all of them she, her, and ma'am every time we see them, but we have to be able to interpret harm and risk when it follows sex-based patterns. In order to address that problem, we have to see it clearly. And so the concept I'm creating is called epistemic substitution, in which one interpretive framework replaces another in ways that are doing harm.
Yeah. And I think, as you allude to, when you say the problem is not disbelief, when the hashtag believe women is so prominent, and if you look at a case like Johnny Depp v. Amber Heard, people just could not believe. People kept telling me, you don't understand. And they would bring out their theory. There's a power imbalance. Men are stronger than women, but not if the man won't use it.
Yeah.
Not if he will not fight back.
Exactly. I do think, Fricker's concepts of testimonial and hermeneutical injustice probably do apply at earlier stages for trans men. I mean, trans men, and this is something that my participants said, is that when they attempted to tell people about the assaults, there did seem to be a barrier to belief. It's like, but you look like a man, like why would someone rape you, right? Or you're a masculine woman, you're not attractive, why would someone rape you? So rape myths do get in the way of belief for trans men. And in a case like the Diamond case, where the perpetrator was a trans woman, as was the case with one of the participants in my study, was also sexually assaulted by a trans woman, and they get told that they're being transphobic if they say anything. So that is also a problem, that if testimony is being suppressed, if you're risking losing community and friends and being called a transphobe because you report these assaults, or you're being told, well, you don't really fit what we think of as an ideal female victim. I mean, we see that within women in general, that there are some women that are going to be believed more than others, just because, they dig into your sexual past. And if they think that you're not a virtuous woman, then you're less likely to be believed. So we see that in women in general, but when you're a woman that looks like me, so that can get in the way of belief. So I do think that, epistemic injustice, the way Fricker describes it, does apply, but I think but this problem of replacing frameworks isn't something that I think her system captures.
Right. This is just me thinking about the unintelligibility part. When we lived in Indonesia, I was walking from my house to my in-laws' house, and I was surrounded by 3 young Indonesian men who were grabbing my breath. They were on their bicycles. They were grabbing and grabbing and grabbing me. And I just had to keep walking. And I told my husband about it, who's a good guy. And, he understood something bad had happened, but he could not understand that that was sexual assault, that I was assaulted, that they put hands on me, that it was very sexual, that anything could have happened at that point, that I was humiliated and scared. I get it because it happened to me, and because I'm a woman who's, like I said, have always had the radar out, and then it happened. So it does have to do with, it's not just about belief, but it's unintelligible. It's never happened to somebody else. They haven't been on high alert their whole lives. They haven't dealt with homophobia their whole lives. They haven't dealt with a body that doesn't look and behave the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And so you go into a courtroom or other very sensitive situations, and it is a problem, and it has to do the epistemology has to do with other things too, like the Cal Rittenhouse case, where people just could not believe that a young man could throw this sign and it wouldn't mean white power.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And despite all the TV footage, all the testimony, people still were like, well, he's just a racist. It couldn't be self-defense. It couldn't be that he was the one being pursued. I don't know if you're familiar with Cal Rittenhouse, but that was
that case, no.
Oh, you don't? That was the young man in Wisconsin, not Waukesha. That was a different one. But there was a Black man who was shot and paralyzed by a police officer, and the town erupted into burning buildings and all this kind of stuff. And he was 17. He had an AR-15, which was not uncommon in that area. It's a hunting rural area or small town. And Biden grabbed a clip of him and put it in his campaign promotion videos, showing him. And he was pudgy. He had a backwards baseball cap, an ill-fitting t-shirt, and that AR-15 slung on. But he had gone down, and people were like, well, he crossed state lines to get into Kenosha. Well, he lived a mile from the border. It was just all. And so he goes down there to help protect the property of people who were his neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And what actually happened was that one man was released from a mental hospital, and he had been in the hospital and in jail on domestic abuse charges and all this kind of thing. And for some reason, and Max Blumenthal pointed this out in a fairly recent interview, he was let out in this very hostile situation. And he threatened Kyle Rittenhouse, who tried to retreat. The cameras all capture it. He's retreating. Somebody else comes up, thinks that he's this, and he shot the man. Somebody else comes up with a skateboard and whacks him on the head, and he shot him. So he ended up shooting and killing 2 men and wounding another man. But and people don't want to accept
Yeah.
don't want to accept it and cannot accept. So, I mean, I think there's so many factors at play. One is that, I mean, he was used in a Biden, we're going to do something about, the Proud Boys and all of that. We're going to do something about that. And it just went from there and from there and from there. And he got a fair trial, bless his heart. The judge ruled correctly in every instance. Where am I going with that? I think you're on to something.
Intelligibility, right? We have to be able to understand things in order to accurately address them, right? When we don't have concepts or we can't wrap our heads around something, it goes unspoken, right? It goes unseen. And I think 50% of all trans men being sexually assaulted is too big a problem to not be seen or spoken. But the next stage of my project, which is how we will wrap up my master's before I head off to my PhD, is I'm looking specifically at that problem of legibility. So I'm switch supervisors now to a historian. I'm going to look at history of examples of male passing women throughout history who succeeded and who were safe and had successful careers and did well. So I want to look at that issue of legibility. What is it within their contexts that something worked for them, right? That they weren't harmed. And so I'm going to look at what that was, what it is within those specific contexts. What I'm finding so far is that it was different for each woman. Like we can't have a single gender theory that we roll out and apply across contexts. Each of these women who succeeded, they did so through very different frameworks of legibility, depending on where they were geographically and at a point in history. The people in their lives needed to make sense of them.
You're saying legibility. Is that what you're intending to say?
Well, intelligibility and legibility. Like if people can make sense of them,
okay,
they're less likely to harm them, right? I think, I think the reason why people find female masculinity so threatening is they don't understand it. They don't know how to interpret it. They have these kind of strict ideas about this is what women are supposed to be and this is what men are supposed to be, and you're not doing that, and therefore you're deviant and worthy of correction and exploitation and punishment. That's the problem I'm trying to solve, is what worked for these women to make them legible within their contexts, where everyone could just they might have thought they were odd, but they didn't harm them, right? So that's how I'm going to wrap up, is I'm going to look at those historical cases and try to map out what intelligibility could look like that would actually start to address the violence problem. But you can't take the word for one of those women. This is what I don't agree with gender theory, is it's sort of taking this one theory from the top down, saying this is how you're all going to understand me, is I just have this gender identity that doesn't match my sex, and that's what you have to believe, and that's how they're trying to. It's a social engineering project. They're trying to make you believe that as a way of making me legible. But what history tells us is that what worked for each of these women was different, and you can't take what worked for one and say, well, this is going to be our social engineering project that I now take into another context and make everyone believe that. Like, you have to make sense within your own context.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, especially when it comes to humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've got this epidemic of little kids, which is somewhat off topic, but what happens to them down the road when they and you told me that you were opposed to children being medicalized, which I'm glad to hear. it's just, it's how people's minds have been captured that even parents will say, children know who they are. My grandson said meow, meow to everything you said to him for about a year when he, I don't think he actually thought he was a cat, but I think just very trying to work out something having to do with people and cats. Children don't know who they are.
No,
They don't know, and they don't understand long-term. They don't, what I'm trying to say is they don't have the ability to consent. They just don't.
no. Well, and there's more concrete evidence than that. I agree with you, but there's also, some fairly concrete evidence that it's been known for decades that gender nonconformity, especially in childhood, is strongly correlated with later life homosexuality.
Yeah.
That's kind of a no-brainer. We all knew that in the 80s. And
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there's 13 studies where before they were medicalizing kids, they were providing them with psychotherapy and working with families and just following them. So when they did those studies, following these kids who had a sense of incongruence like I did, it started when I was 3, that when they just followed those kids over time, most of the time that just naturally shut off and they became homosexual adults, gay men or lesbians. And there isn't a single study that contradicts that. So if we're medicalizing minors, really what we're doing is we're medicalizing gay kids before they have a chance to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's obvious. It's obvious. And so, we've got people saying that people like Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad and people like that are engaging in conversion therapy, which is just silly. It's silly.
And no one's, I wasn't allowed when I was working with young people and families, I wasn't allowed to say to them, well, are you aware that this is really common for gay kids to experience, and chances are they might just be gay? Like, let's wait and see, right? Like, you're not allowed to say that. You're supposed to just affirm them.
Well, and you hear of people who breathe a sigh of relief that their child is trans and not gay. Homophobia is a real, it's a strong thing, and you internalize it and you externalize it. It has real life consequences. So yeah, why not give them a chance to find out that they're just plain vanilla lesbians and plain vanilla gay men, and just, give them a chance to work it out.
Yeah.
But even some of the parents, and I know them, and they're like, but you don't understand. He hates his body. Well, of course, we don't hate our bodies. It's the Western dilemma. And it's part of puberty for a lot of people. Just don't like what's happening.
Yeah, but very few of the young people that I saw, I would say, even had that childhood sense of incongruence. There's so many different things going on now. Once you get just introduced to the idea that kids can just pick whichever sex they want, there's so many reasons why they might feel like that's the best choice for them. And because I had already understood what that gendered childhood incongruence was about, I've seen it enough in butch lesbians over the years. So I had a sense of what that looked like. But very few of the kids that I saw even had that. There were a lot of kids that came to me who had never been gender nonconforming in their past at all, and their families would say the same. She was fine in dresses and loved girly things up until 3 months ago, and now she wants to be a boy. That's not childhood onset gender dysphoria. So even if, and I think there's lots of room for debate about whether the childhood onset type should even be medicalized. But even if we agree that, if that's persistent and consistent enough over time and into adulthood, it can offer some relief. But most of these kids didn't even have that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people aren't understanding is and
Yeah.
that studies, more and more studies come out. It takes time to establish evidence, but there are more and more studies coming out all the time. There's one that just came out of Finland where
Mm-hmm.
they were able to follow these large cohorts of kids, and they had a control studies of kids that didn't go through the treatment. And they found that especially in those that are adopting trans identities in adolescence who didn't have that
Mm-hmm.
early childhood type that were persistent,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that their mental health is just, they have a lot more mental health issues
Mm-hmm.
in general that they onset, but that those mental health issues get worse and worse and worse after transition. It doesn't,
Well, yeah.
it doesn't get better, it gets worse. So
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of time before all of this does get corrected.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's not, so I'm all about following the money. And I came across an article, and I posted this on Facebook. I don't know if you saw it, Morgan, or you either, Aaron, that the market forecast for puberty blockers and that kind of thing, it's like if you want to get in now, because it's between now and 2030, there's going to be so much money to be made. And I connect that to the year 2015 when gay marriage was legalized by the Supreme Court. That's when I did that wedding that made the papers. You had so much funding going into getting same-sex marriage legalized and promoting, the true idea that gays and lesbians are just fine being gays and lesbians. But somebody had to step in and get that money that wasn't going to come. And so it got funneled, I think. I don't know if you agree. I'm just speculating into funding for trans.
The lobby group needed a new cause.
Yeah. Well, and you've got that money. I mean, I learned in my years with immigration and trying to work with immigrant advocacy groups that really what they were about was raising money.
Yeah.
And staying on narrative and not ever disagreeing with any of the tried and true talking points.
I'm sure someone will write a really great book at some point, it's tracing all of this and how did all this happen. It probably isn't a single thing. I agree with you that was probably one major thing that happened was all those lobby groups. Once they won civil liberties for gay and lesbians, they needed a new job. But there were other things happening at the same time. I mean, the Yogyakarta Principles being written and the UN, adopting that same framework and happened around the same time, and then kids getting
tell the people who are listening what the Yogyakarta Principle was. There was a meeting at Gajah Mada University of experts,
human rights experts, lawyers. So they got together and they crafted what they believe should be the international standard of how trans people should be treated, including being able to just self-identify and at any age. And it's not international law. Like, people treat it as though it is. They treat it as the gold standard of how we should be doing things. So it's being taken up and implemented, especially by liberal governments and the UN. And so that's meant by like a top-down plan. This is a blueprint that was designed by a handful of human rights lawyers who said this is how we're going to design this and implement it. So, and then they got big law firms behind them and a lot of money behind this, right? And there's a lot of money to be made, and so that is a big part of it. But I also think with the kids,
2006 or what? 2006?
I think the first one was written in 2006, and then it was updated. But then kids also in around 2015 is when all the kids suddenly had smartphones in their hands, and I do think that's a big part of it too. Is the social media influence on these kids.
Yeah. And as people have pointed out, with COVID-19 and people being out of schools and, isolated, you can get on your phone and kids can get to pornography of the most egregious kind, which I've never looked at it or watched it and don't intend to, but I assume it's way beyond what I saw in a couple of Playboy magazines when I was in high school. It's just, and I think there are a lot of things you could say about that. But it also, what it would say to me, if I think I can speculate that a lot of it's quite violent, that a lot of girls would think, if this is what it means to be a woman, I want no part of it.
Yeah.
I'm out. Or if this is what it means to be a man, that I have to be this abusive, I want out. So that's, of course, I've gleaned a lot of this from Stella and Sasha and the other people who talk about it.
Yeah. It's a big mess.
It is a mess, but you're going to straighten it all out.
This was certainly a very fascinating conversation. And I applaud you in doing the work that you do, Erin. I think that is very fascinating, and it needs to be looked at as kind of the intricacies of sexual assault in these spaces. I know that when I was prepping to do this work or this show, I was trying to look into it, and I did notice how sparse some of the data was on that. And it also was not clear on what transition were they, like how far, they had actually had surgery, or, where they, like you had kind of referred to, alluded to before. So I think that's very, very interesting. It needs to kind of be addressed and looked at kind of with a magnifying glass. So thank you, Erin.
Another comment. Another podcaster, El Chupacabra, Ben Reed asks, he has a podcast in Spanish. He is not a native Spanish speaker.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, and I like him very much. He says, so are children fluid in your estimation?
Fluid in terms of just like their identity is changing over time. I think that's how I'm interpreting the question. I guess
we can't speak for him, but
that's
I would assume,
if I'm interpreting that correctly. Yeah, I mean, kids' identities are fluid, even with that early onset type of, now they call it gender dysphoria. When I was diagnosed, it was called gender identity disorder. I mean, that was fairly well studied and fairly well understood, but even that is fluid like that, because I think what that is when you're gender nonconforming for some reason. Around the age 3 is when we're starting to figure out how to classify things, how to group things and name them, place them into categories. That process, cognitive categorization, that starts around age 3. I think that's why gender dysphoria starts around age 3, is that when someone is extremely gender nonconforming and they're sorting out, here are the boys, here are the girls, here are the men, here are the women. If what they're seeing is too rigid and they can't, they're looking at all these girls and they all have long hair and they're all wearing dresses and they all have dainty features and they all want to play with dolls, and they're none of that, right? I mean, it makes sense to me that a kid would think, well, then I'm not that. right? I must be a boy because they're doing the things I want to do, and I want short hair, and I want to just wear a pair of running shoes, and so I must be that. So I think that is what that really early onset childhood gender dysphoria is. It's a categorization error that happens when you're gender nonconforming and your categories are too rigid. Normally that's why that because that system of categorization stays flexible through childhood. So think of this as not gender dysphoria, but even just sorting other things. I mean, there's cats and there's dogs, and we have to sort all these things into categories. And sometimes there's one that's atypical, and you kind of scratch your head and you think, well, I'm not quite sure where to place you into a category. So as we encounter the world, that system gets more complex, and we integrate more information into that. And eventually the world kind of makes sense to us. But the average 3-year-old can point to a boy or point to a girl and tell you they're a boy or a girl. Right. But there's always some, it's not uncommon when you're gender nonconforming for a kid to run up to you and say, are you a boy or a girl? Like if you don't fit those categories, they can become confused, and they very innocently will ask people, are you a boy or a girl? And then you tell them, and then the world makes sense. Right. And then that's how those categories become more sophisticated and flexible, as they're constantly integrating information into that. So I think that's why most of the time gender dysphoria of that type tends to go away by the time you're an adolescent if you've encountered enough diversity that those categories become more flexible, and if you have the cognitive flexibility to keep learning and bending and adapting. So I think that's why we sometimes see more people with autism with persistent gender dysphoria, is because they're so cognitively rigid that I don't think they have the cognitive flexibility to work some of that out. So there's reasons why people get stuck in it, but normally kids are flexible and are adapting to the world and learning, and their identities change. I know when I was a teenager, I was certain I was going to be a rock star, and now I play banjo. So,
not too far off, right?
Bela Fleck of book lesbians. I mean,
we all remember what it's like to be a teenager. You're very passionate about things, right? You're very certain about things, and the things that we're so passionate about as teenagers, we're not always passionate about as adults. So I think kids need to explore and try things on, and if they want to try different clothes, try different nicknames, try different hairstyles, let them explore and figure that out, because that's what they should be doing as kids, is having room to explore and experience the world and see human diversity.
Right. We're running up on, we've been doing this almost 2 hours, and I don't want to exhaust you. And I know you're still working on finishing up your studies, but one other thing I don't think we've touched on is that you have said that 13% of trans men wound up in prostitution.
Which is lower than trans women. I don't remember what the stat is for trans women, but yes, trans men are overrepresented in prostitution and pornography. The most common reason, I mean, it's the same as any woman would get into prostitution. It usually has to do with survival, low income, and if addictions are on board, I mean, and then now you have to find ways of paying to support your own addiction, and it's so easy once you become vulnerable, economically vulnerable like that. A lot of them come from childhood trauma backgrounds. So when you're vulnerable like that, it's easy to be groomed into things like porn and prostitution.
Yeah. It's a no-brainer, It's a no-brainer.
That's all very interesting. I think I would like to see maybe, some of these statistics on these trans men that go into sexual work, how many of them experience sexual assault, prior to transitioning. because I know that's also an indicator that leads many to go into that field, whether they're coerced or they find that it's no other option but to do that financially. So I think that would be an interesting kind of experiment and data outlook.
My plan at this point for my dissertation is to look at the problem of sexual assault. I want to do a larger scale study where I can really ask those questions and collect some really good data.
Mm-hmm. And I think the issue you run into with those is that the field's illegal. So, you rarely, can put up a poster and say, I'm looking for trans prostitutes for a study. Please, contact me. It kind of seems like you're
in Canada, it isn't illegal. Our Nordic model, I would be able to ask that question in a survey. About
Wait, what question? What's the question?
Like what porn and prostitution engagement and sexual assault. I would be able to in Canada put that into the call out for participants. And I expect you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of overlap between those two things. I think a lot of the people that are going to report a sexual assault to me have probably come out of porn and prostitution.
Yeah, it's in that kind of that cultural field. You will run into that, but I find it maybe interesting to see if prior to them transitioning as a child, like you said, the small pool that you had spoken to, that the two had experienced sexual assault prior to transitioning, basically in their youth, which I think has a very big psychological impact on you, when you grow older. So I'd be interested to find out the correlation, if there is there. With trans men in prostitution, if they had been sexually assaulted prior to transitioning.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate you coming onto the show, being our very first guest, and you are a great one.
I look forward to tuning in to future episodes.
Yes, please.
Thank you. That would be awesome.
A strong audience.
And we're assuming this is going to be a wonderful success, this podcast. And so we'll be asking you back. And I really do want to, whether we keep going or not, I really do want to keep up with what you're doing, because it's fascinating and it's important. It's really important.
I hope it helps people understand where I'm coming from and, why I'm doing the research I'm doing and why I think feminism does work for trans men. I hope we didn't
even get into that.
I hope I've made that case that.
Well, we've certainly made a lot of
Susan Brown Miller. So
there's a lot of topics that we discussed, that I know that we probably barely even scratched the surface. So you'll definitely.
Ben has followed up with great dialogue. So he is. As I said, we've had two of my favorite podcasters drop by.
Awesome.
Yeah. If you can understand Spanish, you need to check out his El Chupacabra. Which,
I'm trying to learn. So I know that they say the best way to learn is being immersed. So maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah. I arranged for him to have Todd Miller on, who is a border specialist. And a good friend, and he speaks fluent Spanish. But I didn't tell Todd, because I didn't think of it, that Ben's podcast is strictly in Spanish, and it's very, very robust. And Todd was like, I didn't know it was going to be in Spanish. I had to kind of get my bearings.
He set him up. Well,
anyway,
thank you
so much of you, Aaron. I think so much of you, and just delighted that you came on the show. I hope we get to meet in person sometime, and
I hope so too.
Keep up with us. All right. Well, I guess I'm going
to.
All righty.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, y'all.